There we go. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Craig will run through the logistics one more time in terms of your questions and answers and the chat. But first, as always, and for those who are regular to our Friday mornings, an important part of our Friday morning, if you're brand new, obviously, welcome to you too. If you walk into the main doors of Heritage Hall, which is our SAIT Calgary campus, that's our main campus, this is the scene you're greeted with, and the floor really is that clean all of the time. This is McDonald Hall inside of Heritage Hall. And as you walk through those doors, there's a vibrancy. There's 101 times 100 stories that hang out in that hall. I had a lady, I've been here for the last couple of weeks, and I had a lady who was excited to sit in one of the classrooms. She'd taken a photograph, sent it to her dad, and I think actually to her mum, and it come back with, yes, that's where your dad actually learned. And it was something like aeronautical engineering in the 1960s. Stories abundance. But what's important, and this isn't about us, 100 years ago, Dr. J.C. Miller was part of, it's just over 100, putting this building together and the visionary for SAIT. But long before that, this was the land, the hunting grounds of the three tribes of the Blackfoot Nation. And there's as much vibrancy, energy, and stories from that time too. The hunting grounds, the three tribes of the Blackfoot Nation at that time were the Kainai, the Piikani, and the Siksika. Today, SAIT acknowledges that it is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which encompasses our Indigenous people of not just those three tribes, but also all of those of the Treaty 7 region, which includes the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. Within that, SAIT acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the southern region of Alberta. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So, yes, as Jenny mentioned, please do keep the conversation going in the chat as we go through this morning talking about empathy and leadership. And you have specific questions that come up, please try to put the questions into the Q&A. It makes it much easier for us to distinguish them from the great conversation that goes on there. And as you know, as we look forward and talk about empathy this morning, I've seen the Oilers mentioned, I've seen the Jets mentioned. I brought up the Leafs, which is tough for me to believe that I did that. But, you know, if you're a fan of any of those teams, I think you need to have a little bit of empathy for the Canucks, Flames, and Senators and Canadiens fans in the audience. And if you don't like hockey at all, I think those of us that do need to be a little empathetic to those of you who are going to put up with us over the next 6 weeks or so. But I'm very curious because this audience that we have this morning is one of our larger ones again, Jenny. And folks, if you can start us off in the chat with why are you here today? What's the importance of empathy and leadership to you, or what are you hoping to get out of this morning? Because it's an interesting topic. You know, it's been brought up a ton, especially through the last couple of years, and we've managed with the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. Just very curious to know what's driving your participation here this morning. And here we go. Looking for additional perspective. Yeah. Continuing to grow, broaden my horizons, to develop more empathy. Oh, there we go. Things are always fine now. Jenny is my mom. That is a fantastic reason to be here.
Hey, Jess.
Area of opportunity on my EQI report.
Cool. There's an interesting place.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exploring. Okay, Jenny, what's sticking out to you here? There's tons of great stuff, and as always, this audience does not fail to disappoint.
There's lots of good information in there.
Yeah.
You know what? I just saw one. I can't keep up with the chat. That's Craig's job. But something popped out. Somebody came by. I saw sympathy versus empathy. I actually think that's a really good place to start because, as you mentioned, empathy is a hail of the day. Like there's certain buzzwords that get fueled and hung on to, and often for good reason. But understanding the difference between those two is a crucial starting point. And so if we take the good words of Brené Brown, in her, there's an infamous 2-3 minute clip of the difference between sympathy and empathy. And for those of you with children, there is now a kid-friendly version too. We'll put the links in the package that comes to you after this. But sympathy really fuels disconnection, and empathy drives connection between people. So for the longest time, sympathy was a really good thing. It was healthy for us to say, oh, Craig, you'll be okay. Because I know you'll be okay because I was okay. So therefore you'll be okay. Or, well, Craig, at least you've got this. And those are our classic sort of sympathetic pieces. And when we look at sympathy is quite selfish. Like sympathy is a real checklist for me. Oh, I was a caring person. I showed them that I cared. They hang out for a second. I've done my job. Now I'll go. And it's all about me sort of almost checking that I'm a nice person box. And in some cases, sympathy is the best that we can offer. But when we're talking about the workplace, or we're talking about even closer relationships, this goes home too. Empathy really is that ability to create space for somebody to be in their experience. And that's difficult for some of us to do, because accepting that somebody else's experience is different than ours, that's hard work. And especially, sometimes it's hard because we care. We want them to be fine. We want to tell them that it'll be okay. Or we simply don't get it. Right? They're hugely frustrated and you're like, huh? What? Why? And we have to, in empathy, believe that their experience is different. And in the deck that we'll send, it's a long quote. I'm hesitant to pop it up on the screen here, but Brené Brown's definition of that says, this isn't about me walking in your shoes. This is me understanding that your shoes are different. And here's the key. I believe you when you tell me your shoes are different. So I'm not going to try and change your story. I'm not going to try and, pull you to my side, to the light side. I'm just going to believe you. There's a lot.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in there. And like the Brené Brown quote, and I can't believe I'm talking about a Brené Brown.
I know, I'm sorry.
Full transparency. I appreciate Brené Brown. I'm not a Brené Brown fan. It's just, I don't know. It's like kale for me. I don't like kale really that much either, but both are probably very good for you. But the whole point of trying to, I think the point around belief, I think is a really important one in there, because I've always had this vision, or perhaps it's a prior viewpoint on empathy, is that it is really trying to put yourself in that other person's shoes and understand it. But the point around belief, I think, is a really interesting spin on that. That perhaps is a good addition to the thought around empathy. And so I guess, Jenny, you've taught me this lesson well, is sometimes to take a look at this from the opposite. Like, what does empathy not look like? What is the opposite of displaying empathy? Perhaps that gives us a bit of a jumping off point, because there's a couple of comments in here around how to be more intentional about being empathetic, exploring the power of empathy. Maybe we come at it from the opposite to start with, to say, here's what it doesn't look like, and the damage that can cause.
So the damage that it does, there you go. Someone who lacks the empathy. We just finished 2 days, say, on assertiveness. I've done this the whole time, because when we have an assertive conversation, we meet side by side, right? The conversation is equal in that I'm an adult, you're an adult, and we're in conversation. So whilst I, in assertiveness, stand up for what I want, think, feel, need, and believe, I respect that you have a version too. When we lack empathy, we hold no respect for that other person and what they're going through. And so what does that do? Well, we leave behind us, if you like, an emotional wake. And that emotional wake is the damage that's done. And so what we can see is people saying, well, he just doesn't care. It's all about him. It's all about the results. It's all about this. And he or she, they don't care, because we don't extend any of that empathy. What else would it look like? It's basically a negate of the other person, and you're devaluing that person in your presence. And so your mindset is, I matter, I'm more important, my way or the highway. And it never shows up. When we look in emotional intelligence, you have a really high assertion and not much empathy. Your intent is good. You want to get the job done. You're get in there, get it done, get out. But because of the lack of empathy, it comes across as arrogant or dictatorship or aggressive or bossy and all the other B words that go with that generally get applied to our female gender. And so that's the lack of empathy. It's the intention is often good, but the outcome is different.
Yeah. It's a couple things you said there that triggered for me, is it's about the results. He doesn't care. It's about the results. And so we were kind of chatting about this beforehand, but where I go with this one is it a balance that you need to find between empathy as a leader and the continued push for results, whatever your results in your role as a leader may be? Because I think there is a balance. Obviously, there is. The answer is yes. There is a balance in there somewhere. But you can't swing all the way to empathy and not continue to focus on what you need to accomplish. I don't know. What does that trigger for you?
So your job 100% is performance and accountability, right? That's what we're looking for. If we're in business, that's our goal. That's our aim, time and time again. And here's the danger with all of this. So we hear the word empathy and we suddenly think, oh, all right, we got to go in with kitten gloves. We've got to be soft and lovely and everybody will be nice. And we'll just pop you in this bubble and it'll all be okay. That's not really empathy either. And so
that's a fantasy.
There you go. You mentioned the balance. So, I mean, first off, empathy covers anything. So if I show up on a Monday morning and I am hugely frustrated about something, the choice is, or the recognition is, Jenny, I see your frustration. What do I need to know? There's your empathy right there. Okay. And okay, how are we going to get to this result of 8 that we need based on that? Now we're working together in that space. But the fact that you've seen me, probably heard and understood me, allows me to work in that space. And the balance is interesting. I think Craig, you posted it actually on LinkedIn. John Amici has a really good little clip where he talks about how we see it. We see it as a seesaw. Teeter-totter here, I think they call it. It's a really funny word to me. And so if we give too much empathy, we're not going to get any of that performance and accountability. It's absolutely about both. And as a leader, you choose to drop the performance and the accountability. Now you're in a real upward battle. So, hear and understand the first person. It's about seeing. And it's also about holding accountable to the quality, to the experience, whatever it is that you're driving for. And both of those are only going to happen through conversation, through that time that it takes. So for some people, pause, recognize the other person, then move on. And for others, because we're so empathetic and we lean in and then we carry that stuff and we care, you can get quite unproductive with your empathy. Like if you feel like you're just listening all day long and somebody's just pouring all that stuff out at you, that's unproductive in your empathy. So the next stage is know your boundaries. What are the boundaries? It's not your job to carry everybody's difficult life, because everybody's life is difficult in their own way most of the time. So where's your boundaries on that? And where does that conversation finish? And two, I think in some cases, at what point do you need to hand this on to somebody who is trained in that area if we're in a serious situation where somebody needs help?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's raised so many good points in there, Jenny, about being sure to have the conversation, the setting of boundaries. I love Mary's comment here. And I think this is often where empathy probably falls down for a lot of leaders. Our lives are so busy, we're often on autopilot, right? And not really paying attention. It's funny you mentioned a Monday morning and coming in and as a leader, needing to take that time to stop perhaps and be intentional and look around the room and see what your team looks like with the conversation, look at the body language, see what's going on when you walk in. The other thing I would encourage, yeah,
sorry, just but one, like there's been lots of things in here for, what can I do? And you just mentioned one of the simplest ones too. So how often do we throw out, especially now we're back face to face, how often do we throw out, how are you today? But we never stop to hear the answer. Like we're gone before they've got out good, great, or fine. And that's not empathy. So if you want to be just a little bit more empathetic, only ask the question when you have the time or you care for the answer. If you don't care for the answer, don't ask the question. And if you do, stop and hear and watch that person. Like if you're really paying attention and they say, oh, I'm fine. Fine is generally a lie. The Italian Job, the movie, has a great definition of it. But the more common acronym, sort of fearful, insecure, nervous, emotional. And it's like, yeah, I'm fine. Jenny, how are you really doing? This isn't the time or the place, but I will fill you in later. Okay, now you have that opportunity to come back and have that conversation. Or if you see somebody start to sink just a little bit, okay, there's a conversation that we need to have. And if you have the time, go for coffee right there and then. Or, should we take a walk? Do we need to talk about this? Doesn't always fit into how the schedule goes. But see the people. We're very transactional, and there's quite a piece of quite a few things in there about busy, and we create busy. So to your point that you said before, it was really good. Is what's intentional, and that's a help within there. Sorry, I dived on you.
No, that's Jenny. It's fantastic. A couple of great points in here, and I think you carve this out a little bit when you said, do we need to take a walk now? If you have time, do we have a coffee or a conversation later? Heather's comment around here about don't ask the question in a crowd or a group. I think that depends on the situation, right? If you're walking into a team meeting and seeing how your team's doing, but I think you do. The point here, I think that I agree with Heather on is you need to be able to individualize that when needed. It's like not everybody likes to be praised in public.
Yeah, for sure. And we advocate often too, like at the beginning of your team meeting, do a 2-word check-in. Okay, so we meet on Mondays, all right? So you could start your Monday morning with, okay, 2 words, best of your world, worst of your world. I'm not going to ask any questions, no stories. What are you going to take? 1.5 minutes of your agenda up. You move around the room. Jenny's best of my world, excited. Worst of my world, anxious. Now, if that anxious comes with a weight to it and your people well enough, and so no questions, no stories there in the meeting. But later, Jenny, I picked up on you're anxious today. You okay? Yeah, it's good. I'm thinking about one of the kids that's got something going on in the next couple of weeks. We're in finals. Both our kids are doing or 2 of our kids are doing finals. So maybe it was that. Okay, cool. Now just a little bit more. In another week's time, how did the kids get on with their finals? Or are they home? Are they back? Whatever that might be. So we're just constantly building connection, really is what it's all about.
Yeah, no, and I think you hit on it right there, whether it's in the moment or later on. That act of following up on, I sensed your anxiety or your excitement sounded really cool. Tell me more about it.
Yeah,
you're making them they're be seen. They're feeling that they've been seen and heard, right?
Yeah.
Which is huge. Just a quick question here. Can you share the FINE acronym again? Fearful, insecure,
nervous, and emotional.
There you go. Nikki nailed it in the later comment.
I was going to say, yeah, it got called.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Shane, a great comment earlier on. I think busy is a choice. I think that's absolutely true, right? I often got an old colleague of mine that every 3 or 4 months will phone me from back east and spend an hour telling me how busy he is. I always have to chuckle at the fact that we just spent an hour talking about that, but that's an entirely different conversation. Can you have too much empathy?
Yes. And that goes back to, are you being productive with it? So you need to know your boundaries. And too much to the extent when we're talking about performance and accountability and in the workplace. And as I mentioned before too, at what point do you need to move that conversation on? And so I learned this in the pandemic, and I apologize, I don't remember who it came from, but something that a leader can offer when it gets to that point where you're like, okay, I got to move on. What are you doing for you? What can I do for you? You may or may not be able to do that, but you can ask the question, and what can the organization do for you? And one of the very strong things that the pandemic has left behind is our ability to find resources for people, excuse me, and whatever they need. And so that sometimes helps. So what are you doing for you? Because it's about you. And there's that part there. And then how can I help you? Or what do you need from me? And what can the organization do for you? And within that, I think if you're finishing there, you're going to end up with a step, with an action that person can take. And we're talking at a point where they really need some help beyond just their leader paying attention.
That's a positive perhaps out of the last couple of years is the fact that we've all learned to be a bit more empathetic. One would hope that we're bringing some of those practices in daily. There's interesting question here from Gabriella. We can practice empathy, but how do you encourage others, members of your team, to practice it as well? Right. And so there's a couple things in this one for me is maybe we can kind of couple trailheads here to go down, Jenny. One is, as a leader, how do you find your empathy blind spots? And two, as a leader, how do you, when you see it not happening on your team, help them to recognize that and help them to develop it? So I think there's a couple paths here that we could, you pick one, I'll remember the other one to come back to.
I was thinking, okay, this is cool. Now you turned it into a curious question. So
choose your own adventure book.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going down a different path. I picked the other page. So, okay, this is cool. Leadership blind spots. There's a reason that they're blind. We're unlikely to notice them. But I think the general gist these days, we're asking for more feedback, feed forward, whichever one we want to call that. So if you hear lines, feedback that might suggest that you're missing the empathy part, pay attention, right? Generally, those are requests to be seen or to be heard. I'll tell you, the piece that sort of fascinates me is you cannot be empathetic. Backtrack. If you want to be empathetic, you have to be a little bit vulnerable. There's another key word of the day. Now, many people like that word. It's a little bit scary because if we're going to be vulnerable, there's an emotional risk. You and I get into a conversation and we're sharing something. Sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's just a work frustration. But I have leaky emotions, okay? So you will see tears in my eyes if I am frustrated, if I am angry, if I'm happy, if I'm delighted. Like it doesn't matter. The eyes are going to glisten. And so that's a vulnerability in there, is that emotional exposure. There's an uncertainty. I have no idea whether you're going to relate to that, try and change my story, tell me to suck it up, sweetheart, and get on with it. Like that's an uncertainty and it's a risk. And so vulnerability involves all of those things. That's why we don't really want to go there, because we are creatures that love the comfort, and all of that is discomfort. And somebody mentioned really early on EDI in that world. One of the reasons that people struggle in the work that's going on there is because it is uncomfortable. It is really hard in some places for people to sit and say, that's your experience. And I may or may not have been a part of that experience. It's a really dry, hard swallow. So that vulnerability piece is what people find difficult in the empathy space. And the way that you can see if it's missing, and as a leader, this is where you can really sort of role model the piece. If you are busy people pleasing, proving yourself the whole time, or just trying to be perfect every single day, there's no empathy in you can't be empathetic in there, because you're just squashing any vulnerability. And so as a leader, you can watch for both of those. You got a people pleaser on your team. Okay, now there's a part, like, pay attention. What's going on for them? How's that working? Have those conversations, get to know that person. And the chances are they're pretty scared of something. And most of us are scared of a fair few things. That's where it gets that's where the doors into that working empathy that's productive. Because if we could get that person who puts all their energy into pleasing everybody to put all their energy into the performance that we're actually looking for, and get rid of pleasing X, Y, and Z, where they're a good person, they're not going to unplease those people, but get the energies flowing in the right direction, then we get that productivity and performance as well. I don't know if I actually answered either question there, but
I think you certainly touched on the blind spots, right? The blind spots and vulnerability. I think that is probably one of the, if you had leaders who were more open to seeking and listening to the feedback. And the piece I would put in with vulnerability here is authenticity and sincerity.
Usually. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because if you're not going to be authentic and searching for feedback as a leader and sincere and listening to it, you may not agree with it. You don't have to. You don't have to. You may decide that, actually, I'm not going to change that. Right. At some point, you do have the ability as a leader to say, it's either going to be this way or not. But if you're not sincere and authentic about it, it is a wasted exercise in seeking.
And we read that. Yeah. Right? And remember too, we build our trust. But that's one of the things that we build our trust on.
Yeah. So you're better off not seeking the feedback. Like, don't make the effort to seek the feedback. Yeah. Right. Yeah. At least your team will say, well, he doesn't ever want to hear feedback, versus saying, well, he just doesn't do anything then.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm projecting. No, I think I'm okay. I guess my team will tell me later. The other question there was, how do you help your team members develop their own ability to increase their empathy or use it more productively? Right. I think that's another key piece. You're one person. You can role model it. You can try and show others that you're working on it, but how do you help them develop it?
So it's all about really seeking different perspectives. So if you go into, I was going to say into the text, but truly throw it into ChatGPT these days, and you're going to read lots about, learning to take other people's perspectives. I've read somewhere too, learn a different language. And when you think about the workplaces that we work in at the moment, right, lots of us have one language. And we are working with people who are working in their second language. So not only are they translating, they're then formulating, then retranslating back. And we're impatient because they can't get an answer to us like that. Ouch. Like, seriously, ouch. And so, those are sort of the big things. But even just like, what are you reading? Who are you hanging out with? So we're going to talk meetings next Friday, but this makes me die. Whoever gave the boardroom, the title of the boardroom, absolute genius. Because we traipse in, we sit next to the person who thinks like us, who looks at it like us, with probably the same agenda. It's no wonder we're bored in our meetings. We'll talk about that next week. But where are you getting the different perspectives from? And so, okay, Craig, our team works with clients so vast. Do we sit around the table and talk about the perspective from a non-profit to the perspective of a profit, to somebody working in the field, to somebody working corporate? That's where we start to build it as a group. Do we look at it from, someone who, I don't know, prefers to work from home? Here's another good conversation. Prefers to work from home all the time, to somebody who prefers the face-to-face. It's all about how many different ways can you grab different perspectives. And to your point before, we don't have to agree, we don't have to be like them, but it's, John Amici puts it as a benign ignorance, which is a really weird two words to put together in the same sentence. But what that really means is it's a kind ignorance. I don't know. And if I don't know, and if I admit that I don't know, then I can be healthy in the kind of curiosity I have to find out more. And who knows, I might just grow a little bit in that space as well.
Benign ignorance.
He has a way with words.
He certainly does. Couple of questions here to get to. One, I'm going to scroll back up in the chat because I caught it there. So interesting question here from Azra. If you've been too empathetic, how do you go back and find the balance?
Own it. And the other thing too, I think when you've been too empathetic, we get caught in a pattern. Oh, Jenny's safe, I'll go dump on her. Jenny's safe, I'll go vent on her. So we're back to boundaries.
Yeah.
And I really like the idea, Craig, I think we've had this conversation 2 or 3 times now. And this is the point. What are you doing for you in this space now? And when do you make, when do you draw the line in that conversation? That's on you. And so just own it and say that I've had this conversation, it's taking up too much time in terms of we've been here before. So let's work together and figure out what action we can take or you can take depending on what that situation looks like. Yeah. But you just own it. Yeah. We all get the chance to reset. We'll tell ourselves a story that it's not cool to reset. I'm going to admire you more as a person if you say, I got to reset on how we look at this. Right? There's my empathy kicking in. Oh yeah, been there. That reset's just a little bit tricky, but good for you. I'll come with you on that.
Yeah. And, it's one of those, I think it's probably one of those conversations that we get more fearful of than what the conversation actually ends up being. But the longer you put it off, the longer you don't enforce your boundaries, the worse and more awkward that gets. So I like this question. It's tied in. I like all the questions. I'm not picking a favorite. Sorry. I like this question in that we've talked about, a leader as yourself, thinking about your blind spots, how you develop empathy, how you look at your team. If you have a leader who isn't empathetic, how do you navigate that?
It depends on your relationship with your leader. So 2 things, and then I'll always go this way. You got to look this way first. What are you really looking for? So what does that mean? My leader isn't empathetic. So start looking for, are they actually a little bit empathetic? Remember, we show up in our workspace with our whole lives, our whole story coming. And so sometimes actually the lack of empathy might be over here in our life, but I'd really like it from you because I can call you on, it's easier to call you to account on this than it is over there. So take a look here. Are we actually looking in the right place? And then the next step, if you have the psychological safety with that leader, and this is important, and the trust and the relationship, then have the conversation. And if they're driving, so this is a bit two-sided, but we talk about performance and accountability, okay? They're driving results and productivity that's actually hugely unrealistic. Comes a lot from leaders who are operating in perfection because their bar's up here and that's not possible. Is, can we have that conversation about that? And what that sounds like is, book the time with them and then here's what I have and show them, okay, what's your evidence, for want of a better word? Like, here's my to-do list, here's my deadline. This isn't possible for one person in this space, for example. And then the key is stop talking. Once you've asked the question, like, can you help me prioritize this? Or can you help me decide what can go off this list? Once you've asked the question, stop talking and give them the space to answer the question. Remember, they're in their whole version of their life and their pressure, and someone's driving that accountability on them too. So now we're working in that sort of balance scale. If you don't have the psychological safety, that's a difficult one to navigate.
100%. I love the way you started that, though, asking the question of what do you yourself want out of this conversation?
What are you looking for? Yeah.
Right. To your point that we started off with way back at the beginning of, this is all just about holding hands and big smiles. And, you made me think of Robert Munch in kindergarten, share everything. Yeah. Going way back in the archives of reading books to the kids at bedtime. But, if that's what you're after, is that realistic? If the lack of empathy is having a true impact on your ability to deliver what you are required to deliver in your job, I think it's incumbent on you to also figure out how you can express that, right? And how more empathy could perhaps lead to better outcomes. Because I would think if you have a perfectionist and somebody who's driving for results like that all the time, that's the language that they're going to lean into, is more results. So there's ways of looking at that. Kind of touched on this before, but I think it's a really good question from Julian. How do you balance empathy and compassion while still driving performance with underperforming team members? And I'm going to hop in here at the start, Julian, because I do think there is a kindness in some sort around accountability and holding people accountable, right? I think one of the big things is that if you take the approach of looking at accountability from the perspective of, it's my job as a leader to make sure that you don't fail, right? And I'm here to help you not fail. I think that's one way of bridging that accountability, empathy discussion. But Jenny, what are your thoughts?
So firstly, as a leader, the worst thing you can do is prop up poor performance, because when you do that, you send a message to the rest of your team. So back to what we said beforehand, that performance, that accountability is absolutely paramount. So how do you balance that empathy and compassion and that part, the performance and the accountability? So to what you were just saying, Craig, which is fabulous, is it's about caring for the people, right? So are you caring for the humans that are around your proverbial table? And care brings with it a genuine kindness and a compassion. So we've got that part. Second part, performance accountability. What are you driving for? And it is staggering the number of leaders who don't talk about it. Well, if you're not talking about it, they're not thinking about it at all. So are you keeping that cadence? Do they actually know what they're trying to get? Do they know what your expectations are? That support and care right there is to be able to articulate those and talk about them and have a passion for them. Because if you don't care, there's no way that we will care about those results too. And so then as that conversation tends to build, then the momentum builds within it as well. And I think, and unfortunately, there are still some places that operate, if your aim is, Jenny, you have to hit 5 every week, and 1 week I get 3. If you come in and shove that at me and that I wasn't good enough, blah, 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 then my performance is going to go down. And it's not just for an hour or two, we're talking days, and there's research behind that. If you come in and say, Jenny, it's not like you, everything all right? Now there's your empathy piece. Yeah, okay, here's the story, here's whatever it is, here's the reason behind that. Okay. And I have to hold this 5. How are we going to get back to that 5? What does this look like? There's a difference between squash someone immediately, provide somebody that hand of support or that hand of care. And we roll into, but they make the same mistake 3 times in a row. Now you're propping up poor performance. Okay? Yeah. If you got a parent who's sick or a child who's sick or something else is going on, and I say to you, the best I can do is come in and make 3 for probably the next 3 weeks. Okay, are you ready to hear and understand that? And now the ball's in your court.
Yeah. No, it makes a ton of sense. And I think I love that Carol and Sandra somewhat called out that I somewhat paraphrased Brené Brown after earlier talking about Brown. So I see and hear you, Carol and Sandra. I love Heather's comment in here as well about, like to have the conversation about their reputation. So if you have perhaps somebody who's underperforming, having that one-on-one conversation about, what do you want to be known for here?
Mhm.
Ultimately, I think any performance-related conversation, Jenny, you touched on a few things. You get what you tolerate.
Yep.
Don't prop up your poor performance. Be kind and looking for the clarity in what you are accountable to, and hold people accountable to that. And then ultimately, you either have a coach up or a coach out conversation. Right? It's not, the decision tree isn't quite that simple, but
No.
those, ultimately it boils down to that. If it's a skill problem, help your people get the skill.
Yeah.
Skill is there. If it's an attitude problem, that's a very different conversation. But this is a different conversation. Another final question here, probably as I'm looking at the time, is what do you do? And I think we've kind of touched on this, but I'll see if there's any other thoughts you have here, Jenny. What do you do when you think people are taking advantage of your empathy?
Taking advantage of, sorry, say it again.
Taking advantage of your empathy.
Know your boundaries. And again, like in the situation, so pay attention. What does taking advantage mean? And you just said it, Craig, you get what you tolerate. So if that's the case, like own that as it's going. If they're constantly there at your desk because you're the one that will listen, and where do we sit in those relationships? If it's Jenny coming for the 6th time to complain about this, then there's absolute rights to say, Jenny, I know this is important to you. I have a deadline for 2:00. I'm really sorry. I can't have that conversation today. And there's the boundaries. If it's Jenny showing up for the first time, who you can just see it written all over that she just needs somebody at that moment, that's a different conversation. And then that comes down to paying attention. And so it means we have to see the people in front of us, I think.
No, it's really good. And the other thing, that thought that came to me earlier when we were talking about how to work on empathy with your leader. And I think you touched on something earlier in the conversation, Jenny, that I wanted to put out there earlier was, so as a leader, if you're trying to gauge your team, see how they're doing, see what the reaction is on that Monday morning meeting when you're walking in, I'd encourage those sitting at the table when their leader comes in to also think about, what state is your leader in?
Yes, 100%.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
We're coming at this very much from the perspective of, leaders are perfect and need to be, like, leaders aren't perfect, right?
No,
they're all carrying, to your point, everybody has their story that they're walking in with.
100%. That's crucial.
Right.
It's got to go both ways.
Yeah. And I think we often forget about that in these conversations, but it's 8:45, Jenny.
Oof.
So
We did that.
I know there's a couple questions that we didn't get to. We will do our best to answer them in the follow-up material. And Jenny, big thought.
We can do that. Let's go back. We'll see if the technology will work for us. Oh, there's Brené Brown's quote. There we go. Okay, so for those of you who are new here today, we always wrap up with our big idea. And sometimes it's someone else's idea that we borrow, but our big idea: 2 applied strategies that you can take away and use today, tomorrow, next week, and 3 questions that we'll leave you with. Sometimes it's a bit more than 3, but 3 is the aim. 3 questions that we'll leave you with at the end of the day. So we've talked about this quite a bit in that empathy and performance and accountability. And really, I think the underlying message to remember is the key is the relationship. Everything that we do is based on relationships. And so if you're building solid relationships, if you hold me accountable, I am much more likely to listen and act if I have a good relationship with you. If I don't really know you, okay, we'll push that one. So think about the relationships of the people around you. That's my big idea for today. So a couple of things that you can take away and use. We've talked about this a lot, excuse me, which is great. Are you seeing the people in front of you? So a couple of reminders. If I see you, if you're working with me and I see you, maybe present consistently. And consistency is the word in there. This isn't an as you please or when you feel like it. This is be present consistently. And in order to do that, here's a John Amici piece for you. Can you swivel your chair completely? Like, how often do we pay half attention? Somebody comes in here and they're standing at the door and finishing an email. Just be a second. You can like talk to me. I'm listening. I'm not listening. I'm not listening until the point that I actually swivel my chair completely. And that says to the person in front of you, I value what you're about to say. It's a really cool one to keep in your head, and you don't have to be in a chair to remember that. And if that's the case, then I'm going to care long enough to hear your answer. And that means getting rid of the phone in between us. How often does that cell phone sit between us? And those of you who pop it in your pocket but do this at your smartwatch, that just said, I don't value you in front of you. So it's all about being present and paying attention. And this one we didn't mention yet. When you get the slide deck, there's a slide for it. When you're in a conversation, one of the quickest ways to know where you're sitting, are you judging or joining that conversation? It's an incredible mindset shift between judging the other person, joining the conversation. So more than one thing there that you can take and use every day in every conversation. Our second one comes down to how are you listening? We didn't really talk about listening today. The opposite to listening with a generosity is being pretty stingy in your listening. And so as we listen, it's not our job to change their story. Now, every now and then we're pretty dramatic human beings. So we can ask good questions around reality, but it's not our job to change their story. And it's definitely not our job to try and switch somebody's emotions around. That's their emotion. Let them have it. But pay attention. There's a lot of good information in there too. And then finally, the 3 questions. Craig will be a bit excited at the moment because it looks like just 3 questions. And so we, who are you sitting next to? Are you getting different perspectives? Are you finding out about the people that you perhaps don't know that well? Are you hearing their stories? Everyone has a story. Which leads us to the second one, Mark Goulston's fantastic quote, be more interested than you are interesting. That doesn't take any effort. Well, it takes a little bit, but everyone can teach you something. And then ties into the last one there, how are you listening? But I couldn't stop on just 3. Look, it looks so boring now on the page. So I added more, Craig. There's a quote for us all to remember, also comes from Mark Goulston. We all need a little bit of empathy. And Craig, to your brilliant points at the end there, this goes upwards as much as it goes sideways, as much as it goes downwards. Everybody has a right to be heard, seen, heard, and understood. And if we throw value in there too, we'll do a much, much better job every single day. There you go. All the information for you right there.
Fantastic.
And over to you.
Thanks. Yeah. So next week, we're back again in the next 2 weeks. I've thrown the link. I threw the link to register for next week in the chat. Hasn't rolled off the screen yet. So please do click on that. And if you've got your phone, if you pulled your phone out now, because I know you put it down while Jenny was talking, feel free to grab that QR code there. And then 2 weeks from today, we will be back chatting with Iggy Domagalski, the CEO of Wajax, and really excited about having Iggy join us. So with that, have a fantastic Friday, everybody. The Oilers play Monday night. And Jenny,
Sorry.
Jenny, as always, I appreciate you. Thank you. And have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thank you too. Bye, everybody.